I'm live, and greetings. Hello, and welcome to the Ask Me Anything. I'm going to start it a little bit early, uh, give people a chance to show up. Um, yeah, we're going to talk about the Black Dahlia case. And I've got Boxy here with me. Right, Boxy? Andre, greetings. Where are you located, Andre? Please tell me that the audio is working. That's one of my big fears. Okay. Corpus Fusion, welcome. Yeah, as you people show up, just put a little word in the chat, of a line in the chat about where you're calling from, or where you're watching from. And please, somebody let me know the audio is working. That's been one of my big problems with the Black Dahlia Ask Me Anything. Hey, Spins and Needles. Andre, Netherlands. Okay, great. The audio is working. Terrific. Welcome. Helen, welcome. I know that you're calling from the future. I'm very impressed. Welcome. Nice to have everybody. I'm going to give folks a few more. Oh, San Diego. Very good. Robert in Austin. Okay, great. Glad to hear it. I think this is going to be an interesting session. I have gotten a lot of email questions. I will try to get to them all between the and people are still showing up, so I'll wait a couple more minutes in case there's stragglers. Oh, Femke from London, greetings. This is nice. We got people from all over the place. That's very good. Very cool. Boxy, we have guests. Whoa. Okay. One more minute, maybe. Yeah, it is nice. It is nice to see. I have the chat on slow, just because one of the early sessions that I did, I had some Steve Hodel people on, and oh, we got two from Austin. No, yeah, we got two from Austin. Welcome. Okay. All right. I think we can get started here. Okay. This is the Larry Harnish. Oh, St. Paul. Oh, hey, Sheila. Great. Thanks for coming. Yeah, this is the Ask Me Anything for June 2023. And the reason I started doing the Ask Me Anythings is I got really fed up with the caliber of interviews that were being done on the Black Dahlia case, and in the true crime industry in general. It's just gotten increasingly shady, sketchy, all that kind of thing. And I just got to the point where I didn't want to be involved with doing the TV interviews on the Black Dahlia case anymore. And so I decided, as an alternative, I would do the Ask Me Anythings, and they are first Tuesday of the month, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And so that's kind of I've done a couple now. They're always entertaining. I always get a lot of questions. It's always really fun. If there are any Steve Hodel people in the audience, stick around. You might learn something. Okay. Big question. The big question here is, where is Steve Hodel? Where did he go? Someone pointed out to me that his blog has been quiet for a long time, and Steve is always looking for new clues and new evidence and all that kind of thing. and so his long silence. He hasn't posted anything for over a month now, and so that's unusual for him because Steve always has new evidence. He always has new clues. He's always got a new book, something like that. Anyway, where is Steve Hodel? If anybody knows, I mean, not where does he live, but has anything happened to him? Okay, that's that. Same thing. PU Eat Well people. Stick around. You might learn something. John Gilmore people. This book here, Severed. Okay, this book here, very, very bad. No, no. Don't read this. It will make your head explode. Just stay away from this book, okay? Stay away from all these books, okay? I have them here to warn people to stay away from all of them. Don't read any of those. They'll make your head explode. Okay, so where am I on the book? Okay, I am at the point where I have got Elizabeth Short going down to San Diego in December of 1946. That's where I am now. And you might say, gosh, Larry, how long does it take to write about Elizabeth Short being in San Diego in December of 1946? To which I would say, okay, what do you know about San Diego in December of 1946? I'm going to guess not much. So it takes some research. It takes some digging. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's kind of what's going on with the book. Beyond that, I can either take a live question or I can go to the emailed questions. If somebody's got a live question, that's great. If not, I'll go to the emailed questions. I have a bunch of them. So okay. Corpus Fusion. Was Beth Short's mental state childlike? She seems to have careless behavior, bad decision making like a 12-year-old would make. That's an interesting question in the sense that I think she was kind of naive. I don't think she was childlike. Gordon Fickling, one of her last boyfriends, said that she got a lot of passes, but she knew how to handle them. I think Elizabeth Short had, not necessarily cognitively, I think she was a relatively smart person, but I think emotionally she was having problems, which would affect, emotional problems would affect intellect in terms of bad decision making. Remember that when she was killed, she was only 22. She had been around a lot. I think I'm not sure how streetwise she was. She might have considered herself sort of streetwise, but she generally partnered up. She generally had a sidekick of some sort, and one of the better known ones is Margie Graham. Margie Graham was the woman who was waitresses with Elizabeth Short back in Massachusetts, and then Elizabeth Short ran into her in Hollywood, and they kind of kicked around Hollywood for a while until Margie Graham said, I've had it with LA. I'm going to go back to Cambridge. And she took off. But Elizabeth Short generally hooked up with some sort of sidekick, is how she operated. Did she make bad decisions? Yeah. I mean, in terms of what we know about her, her lifestyle and getting killed. Yeah. Looking at it as we do now, why didn't she go back to Massachusetts and live with mom? Well, that was not an alternative for her. So that's kind of where we are on that. I'm not sure that answer addresses your question entirely, but I don't think she had a. I wouldn't say that she had like a kid's IQ or low IQ or anything like that. When you read her letters, she expressed herself remarkably well for someone who was a high school dropout. And I think when you look at the letters that were published in the papers, she had some smarts. It's just her decision making was bad, but not like she had some sort of cognitive issues. Okay, let's go to the first of the emailed questions, which is from Andre. Hello, Andre. Andre's first email question is, how did Detective Edward C. Boynton come into contact with Elizabeth Short in 1946? Okay. Who on earth is Edward C. Boynton. Okay. Edward C. Boynton was a guy who met Elizabeth Short in the drugstore in Long Beach, which is where she got the Black Dahlia nickname. And so there was a corner drugstore up the street from where she was staying for a couple of weeks in Long Beach before she came up to Hollywood. That would have been in the summer of 1946. And she would hang out in this corner drugstore, and this fellow named Edward C. Boynton ran into her there, and that's how he met her. He would talk about his encounter with Elizabeth Short in later years. I think he gave a couple of interviews and that kind of thing. But that's how they met, and that should answer your question. Okay. So Andre, does that take care of your question since you're here? And let's see. I hope. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, another live question. Live question, anybody? What pages were ripped out in Elizabeth Short's address book that was recovered after her death? Okay. Corpus Fusion, the address book. We don't know precisely. They weren't, first of all, the address book. Let me take a running start at that question. What is the story with Elizabeth Short's so-called address book? Okay. In like the fall of 1946, Elizabeth Short was staying at the house of a guy named Mark Hansen, who had a couple of theaters. He was a partner in the Florentine Gardens, and she was staying at his house. While she was there, she appropriated a pocket calendar for, I think it was 1937, and it was in Danish. Mark Hansen's story was that, oh yeah, I was visiting my native Denmark. Somebody gave me a pocket calendar. I kept it around as a souvenir. I never really used it. I didn't notice that it was missing until it showed up in the investigation. And so we know when Elizabeth Short got it because she was living with Mark Hansen. So that was in, I think it was like October of 46. And the way she used it was she generally used it as an autograph book. In other words, if she met you, or if you met Elizabeth Short, she would hand you this pocket calendar and ask you to write in your contact information on, and it's just random pages. I mean, there is no order to the address book at all. It's just it's like an autograph book. Anyway, people would write their names and addresses in there. Now, because you're dealing with Hollywood in 1946, many of the people who put their information in her so-called address book didn't give their real information. They didn't give the right data. Red Manley is a great example. Red Manley is the guy she met down in San Diego, and he's the fellow who drove her back to Los Angeles from San Diego. Okay, he's a married guy. He isn't going to give her his right name. He calls himself Red Morris or Robert Morris, and he doesn't use his home phone number, right? He uses his business number. And that was not unusual. That was kind of typical. If you met Elizabeth Short, especially if you were a married guy, you're not going to use your right name. You're not going to use your home number. So that's kind of how she used the address book. Now, according to the LAPD summary, and I think it's mostly in the LAPD summary. Might be some of that in the FBI file. I'm not sure, but I think most of it is in the LAPD file. Anyway, when she was killed, the killer took items from her purse, including the address book, and soaked them in solvent and mailed them to the newspapers. And it was the Los Angeles Examiner and other newspapers. Now, the killer he didn't rip, okay? Killer did not rip the pages out. They were cut out with a sharp instrument. That's according to the LAPD report. But it was, again, it was random. He cut out a whole run of pages and other pages here and there. So but the address book was originally probably about 400 pages. And so the killer cut out, I think, altogether something like 100 pages, maybe more. So we don't know what was in any of that stuff, obviously. So that's kind of the story on that's kind of what we know about the address book, in terms of how she used it. Uh, like everything that was in her purse, the killer soaked it in solvent before mailing it to the Examiner and other newspapers in this little envelope that was addressed with cutout letters. And so the killer, whoever he was ahead of his time in terms of like not leaving fingerprints, anything like, destroying any kind of identifying marks. So that's kind of what we know about the address book. Okay, let's go to another emailed questions here. Okay, I have one. This is from last month. I got a lot of email questions, so I'm going back to one. This was from Broder Bear from last month, who said the bisection and facial disfigurements are the polar opposite of surgical precision. As usual, the evidence shows the lie in Hodell's claims. The Man Ray stuff is hilariously loose. Okay. The bisection and the facial disfigurements. And I have to disagree here. The original medical examiner, Frederick Newbar, when he did the autopsy on the body of Elizabeth Short, her bisection was very precisely done. Okay. The quote from Harry Hansen, the lead detective, was, "That's a fine bit of surgery." So it was cleanly and professionally done by somebody who knew exactly how to cut a body in half. And to people who are interested in that, there are a lot of YouTube videos, if you want to watch them, of guys, and they are guys who are butchering, let's say, pigs or deer, stuff like that. And you watch these guys, and they really know what they're doing. It is, they know the anatomy of that animal. They know how to do it. And it's in a similar way. Whoever cut Elizabeth Short in half knew exactly how to do it. Very precisely done. This facial disfigurements, a lot was done to her body. It was mutilated quite a bit. We can kind of guess what the meanings were. I feel confident that whoever killed her, all of those disfigurements had meaning for him. Whether we can discern what those meanings are is, that's kind of an interpretive thing. But they meant something to him for sure, and that's that's what I would have to say about that. The Man Ray stuff is hilariously loose. Yeah, it's just the Man Ray stuff. And what's interesting is the Man Ray scholars don't even address the whole Steve Hodell's ridiculous claims about how Man Ray was murder bros with George Hodell. It's like, nah. Okay. Esage Cantu of Austin. Did any criminal profiler give you any useful insight on the killer? I think you previously mentioned talking to John Douglas. Yes, I did talk to John Douglas. Remember, this was in 1996, and profiling had the profession or the practice of profiling had a somewhat different reputation. What happened over the years is that everybody was doing profiling, everybody was hanging out a shingle. Maybe they were good, maybe they were not. A lot of people did like off the shelf kind of boilerplate profiles. Well, it's the quiet loner with the well-maintained older car, and wasn't always true. And I think if you go back to like the DC Sniper, if you remember that, like something like 20 years ago, that was not at all profiling. Hey, human resources. So that's kind of that. Now, John Douglas gave me a lot of good insight. He gave me a lot to think about. Unfortunately, when John Douglas wrote Cases That Haunt Us, he didn't rely on the material that I sent to him. He relied on, he and his co-author relied on this very, very, very bad book. And so, unfortunately, what's in Cases That Haunt Us is not, it's not very good. Garbage in, garbage out. What John Douglas told me was very useful. And some of the things he said were, okay, what do you know about the neighborhood? Picking the crime scene, it had meaning for the killer. He said, look, Larry, you have a subject, and he always called him a subject. You have a subject who's in a car, and he's making decisions about where to leave the body, and he's drawn to this place. So it has meaning for him. It isn't just some random spot, because he wanted the body of Elizabeth Short to be found. That was his whole goal. That was his motive. He wanted that body to be found. So that gets into a lot of crime scene selection. And so he asked me, John Douglas asked me a lot of questions about the neighborhood. And I said, well, at that time, because remember, we're talking about 1947, it was a white middle-class neighborhood, which it was in 1947. It naturally, as all things with LA, the demographics have changed considerably since 1947, but that's what it was at the time. So that kind of thing. So yeah, that was the main thing. Was he sent me off investigating the location, and the choice of the crime scene, and so that was very useful to me. So I hope Esage Cantu, I hope that answers your question. Douglas was very helpful. Okay, Ashley, I like that question. I am going to skip to one of the email questions, and I'll come back to that. Okay, Femke Blanco. In the 2001 film James Elroy's Feast of Death, you put forward the Walter Bailey theory. Do you still hold that theory to be true? If not, what has changed since? Yes, I do hold that to be true. I don't see any reason to change that. Of all the suspects that have been put forward, you can eliminate all of them. You can eliminate George Hodel. You can eliminate Bugsy Siegel and Norman Chandler, in this stupid Black Dahlia file. You can eliminate Jack Anderson Wilson. You can eliminate all of those people. You can eliminate Leslie Dillon. And if P.U. Eatwell had spent 5 minutes with this box, she would know that Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco, and there's no way, because these guys investigated the heck out of Leslie Dillon. You cannot imagine the amount of shoe leather they spent investigating Leslie Dillon. It's all in here. If she had spent, or if she had talked to me 5 minutes, Larry, what do you think? But no. Anyway, so that, okay. So Ashley, let me go, since that kind of that kind of goes with your question. Ashley, not only does P.U. Eatwell's book mention Donald Freed, it's dedicated to Donald Freed. Did I interview him? Yes, I did. I talked to him, and Donald Freed is an interesting guy. I went over to his house and sat down and talked to him, and he outlined for me. And when did Donald Freed contacted me right after my story in January of 1997 on the 50th anniversary of the Black Dahlia case. He was one of the first people to contact me, called me up, and I said, okay, yeah. So I went over and I talked to Donald Freed. Very nice guy, all that kind of thing. And he told me all of what ended up in P.U. Eatwell's book. He was trying to sell that story to me. And I put it in the back, I kind of put it in the back of my head and made a note of it. And then, as being a journalist, as I went around interviewing other people and whatnot, I would check out that story to see if there was anything to it. And eventually, when I got access to the district attorney's files, it's like, no, this is totally bogus. So yeah, I did interview Donald Freed. He tried to sell me that exact story. I passed on it because it didn't add up. And so he finally found somebody who would take the bait on that story. And as I said, Donald Fried is a nice guy, but he's also a conspiracy nut. If you look at the books that he has written, um, it's all, gosh, I think it's like JFK assassination and all that stuff, you know. So as pleasant and nice as he is, you cannot really you can't really trust what he says. Um, so Ashley, that is my experience with Donald Fried. I did interview him, um, and it was not usable. So okay, let's go back to the emailed questions here. This is Heaven. Let's see. Was Elizabeth Short close with her older sisters? From what I gather, it seems like she and Virginia didn't speak regularly. I can't find anything on Dorothy, and that's probably best for the family. Okay. Um, now, again, I'm going to take a running start. I'm an only child. So siblings is a language I do not understand. But if you look at the family constellation of Elizabeth Short, you've got the mom and you've got five girls uh, spaced pretty close together. What is it, five girls in 7 years or something like that? They're very close together. Um, my understanding from the family and talking to various people is there was a lot of friction. And some of it is understandable. There were stories within the family of one sister, and I won't use their names. One sister, you know, because they all had to share rooms and whatnot. There's a story about one sister drawing a line down the middle of the floor. This is my half of the room. This is your half. And for most of her life, Elizabeth Short didn't even have her own room. Um, there were, you know, you had five daughters plus the mom competing for one bathroom. You know, there was some friction there. Whether they were close, um, maybe somewhat. The social dynamic that I'm aware of is Virginia was the oldest sister, and so naturally, she got the job of kind of watching out for the younger sisters. Well, she resented them. I think it's fair to say that Virginia resented the younger sisters because she had to take care of them all because you know Phoebe, mom was away or working or whatever, and then they resented her for being bossy. So you know there were complicated dynamics. I'm not really sure how close Elizabeth Short was to any of the sisters. Maybe closer to some than others, but overall not much. It's safe to say that Virginia, the oldest sister, did not know that Elizabeth Short. I don't think she knew that Elizabeth Short was in LA. Uh, I don't think they were in regular communication. I don't think. Maybe they were. Um, it's hard to know. Possibly, but it wasn't. It wasn't like a tight knit family. I think when I interviewed the youngest sister, you know, she said, "I'm the baby of the family. I have nothing but good memories." So I suppose by the time she came along, things had evened out. So that would be my answer on that. Human race sources. Do I have a main suspect? Yes, I do. Um, I mentioned earlier there's a guy named Walter Bailey, um, and this builds on the investigation of the crime scene. Uh, John Douglas asked me, Larry, what do you know about the crime scene? And I said, well, I don't know. It's this neighborhood in South LA. And he said, well, that's that you really need to look at the crime scene and the history of the crime scene and that kind of thing. It's like, okay. So in looking at that, I spent a lot of time looking at the history of that block of Norton Avenue. And it was it was nothing particularly remarkable. Um, it was just an average neighborhood in Los Angeles that had been part of a Spanish rancho and then was bean fields and then got developed into into a housing development off Crenshaw Boulevard. And that neighborhood at that time, well, okay, that block with the block where her body was left, that was vacant. But the neighborhood just to the north of there was those were starter homes. Okay, those were starter homes for young families, And indeed, that's what you find when you look at who was living there. Betty Bersinger and her husband were perfect example of it. Was a couple with a World War II veteran and a young daughter. Very typical. That's who they were. And so I spent all this time researching the neighborhood and not finding anything. And then a guy named Kyle Wood sent me this box of material that he had compiled. He's a Dahlia fan. And one of the things Kyle sent me was this marriage certificate of Virginia Short and Adrian West. And I thought, well, that's a sort of a strange thing to have, but okay. And I looked at the certificate and noticed that they got married in Inglewood, another suburb south of Los Angeles, which used to be a middle class neighborhood, white middle class neighborhood. And it's like, well, that's interesting. So as I was looking at this marriage certificate, then I noticed one of the signatures on there, but it was a third or fourth generation photocopy. It was hard to read. So I sent off for a fresh copy from the state of California. And sure enough, there is an address on there of South Norton Avenue. And not just South Norton Avenue, but a block from the crime scene. And it's like, well, that's interesting. Virginia Short knew somebody who lived a block away from where her sister was found dead. Maybe I ought to look at that. And so, long story short, I investigated all of that. Remember, this is in the 90s. So there's no Google. There's nothing is online. It's all, paper and pencil and stuff like that. Anyway, I located the Bailey family. And Walter Bailey was a surgeon. He did live a block from the crime scene. There is a connection between the Short family and the Bailey family. And so, yeah. And somebody asked, do I still think Walter Bailey, do I still consider him a suspect? Yeah, I do. For the simple reason that you can eliminate all these other people. And when you go online, when you go to Wikipedia and it's like Black Dahlia suspects, you can blow off all of those people. Carl Balsiger and all that stuff. Walter Bailey, you cannot eliminate him. And so that is that human resources is human resource is my answer. Hi, Linda, and hi, Shirley's Temple. Boxy says hello. Oh. Okay. Let's see here. Helen. Okay, here's an email question from Helen. I'll do two. The first one was, what was the name of the perfume Elizabeth Short wore? The name of the perfume is, I'm not telling. So there is, I have entrusted one person who knows what that is. And other than that, that'll be in the book, but I'm not, the thing about the Black Dahlia stuff is if I say something, it'll get blasted over every true crime podcast. As a matter of fact, my Black Dahlia alerts were buzzing today because Zach, what's his face, who does the paranormal stuff, was doing a Black Dahlia and going to the Hotel Cecil, and there's no connection between the Black Dahlia and the Cecil Hotel. That is just totally invented. So that's my rant about that. The other question is, did she ever reach out to her sisters for help or advice while living this transient lifestyle? And I kind of answered that question. I think Elizabeth Short got help from her mom. Phoebe would send Elizabeth Short money. She'd get money from Phoebe. She would get money from various boyfriends. I think Gordon Fickling was fairly generous with her. But beyond that, it's whether the sisters were, they were all in a similar situation in that they were all, she was the middle. Okay. Elizabeth Short was the middle. So there were two older sisters and two younger sisters. So Elizabeth Short was 22. So the younger sisters were really not in a position to help her out. I'm not sure. Virginia was newly married and living in Berkeley, and I'm not sure they were in a position to really help her out all that much. So that's to the best of my knowledge there. Okay. Linda, do you have a book coming out? Yes, I do have a book. I have a book in that I'm writing it. I said earlier, I am at the point where I'm writing about Elizabeth Short going down to San Diego in the last month of her life. And so that's where I am now. Um, these things take time. And as I say, the Black Dahlia case teaches patience. It really does. You cannot just, if you just think you're going to whip out some book, it's like, no, you're going to be terribly, terribly disappointed. Okay. Um, let's see here. This was an email question. There's never been any LAPD corruption. This is from Karen. Okay. This was a comment on one of my YouTube videos. And it's like, yeah, was there LAPD corruption? Of course there was. Was there anything like the magnitude of what Steve Hodel says is where his dad could just roam around Los Angeles killing people with impunity, knowing that he would never be prosecuted for it? No, no, that is ridiculous. Um, you know, um, and I will just point out that the LAPD has gone through a lot of different reincarnations in its history. The big black eye was in the 30s, and that was all of city government. Little civics lesson here in LA history. The government in the 1930s, city government in the 1930s, the Shaw administration was corrupt in terms of job selling. There was a lot of job selling. And I had one retired police officer, police captain tell me, yeah, in the 1930s, you bought your job. And he said, I didn't want to be part of that. So there was that. There was a recall of the mayor in 1938 that resulted in a huge shakeup in city government, new police chief, that kind of thing. And very briefly, the LAPD had a reform police chief named Arthur Wharton. Pardon me, not Arthur Homan. And he stepped down after a while and then was replaced by the World War II police chief, C.B. Horrell, who was in turn replaced by William Wharton, the Marine general. So was and people will say, well, what about Brenda Allen? It's like, okay, if you don't know, Brenda Allen was the Hollywood Madam and was head of a prostitution ring and all that kind of stuff, and was involved with somebody on the Vice Squad. Okay, this is my answer to the Brenda Allen people. Okay, did Brenda Allen kill anybody? No. Was she investigated by the Homicide Squad? No. Then F off. I mean, and the point of the Brenda Allen thing is all those people got caught. They didn't get away with it. So that's kind of my rant about the LAPD and corruption. Steve Hodel will say, well, the LAPD in the 40s was a real life LA Confidential. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Not at all. It was it was a fairly prestigious department. A lot of the LAPD was influential in terms of law enforcement in that era. And I think I'll leave it at there. Anyway, nothing, not covering up murders. No, absolutely not. Okay, let's see. Femke, I hope I'm saying that right. How did I meet James Elroy? Am I still in touch with him? Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. How did I meet James Elroy? Well, again, I was back in 1996, which was a while ago. I was doing a story for the LA Times on the 50th anniversary of Elizabeth Short's murder. And I contacted James Elroy. I thought it would be good to do an interview with him to get sort of that angle, that perspective. And so I interviewed him. We remained in contact. James, shall we say, likes publicity. He likes to be in touch with he likes to be in contact with people who are in the news media. He likes to do that. And so we became friends, or quote friends, as much as anybody is ever friends with James Elroy. James moves on from people a lot. And, my relationship with James is he was always a little bit miffed with me because I did not worship at the feet of the master. I worked at the LA Times. I worked with a building full of great writers, And a lot of them were much better writers than James Elroy. I worked with Mike Conley. You know, he was just a guy I used to see in the office. This was before he became a best-selling writer. You know, Mike was just an average guy. And as a matter of fact, if you had to pick somebody around the room who was going to be a best-selling author, Mike Conley would probably be the last guy you would pick because he was very, very quiet. Mike was very quiet, and he was very preppy at that point. If you remember that the whole preppy era. Anyway, James and I did we did Feast of Death and that kind of thing, and then Black Dahlia Avenger came out, and one of Steve Hodell's claims was that his dad killed James Elroy's mom, and James considers his mother's death his intellectual property, and so he said "F you" to Steve Hodell. And then when the paperback version came out, James was suddenly like, "Oh, I will write the introduction to your book, Steve." And so that's kind of that. So James and I at that point just kind of drifted away. James and Hodell had a falling out because Hodell, Elroy has a falling out with everybody. He doesn't keep his friends. He goes through them fast. So that's fine. As a matter of fact, there's some British author who did a biography of Elroy, and it's like, why would you do a biography of this guy? He's unreadable. His later books are just like, I can't read this stuff. But anyway, I am in there as the embittered former friend, and it's like, okay, fine. So that's the human resource. That's the short version of my friendship with Elroy. Let's see here. Okay, here's one from Carl. Okay. Let's see. Apologies if this is a basic question with an already known answer among Dahliologists. I hope there aren't any Dahliologists. I'm curious whether there were ever any, serious attempts to link Elizabeth Short's murder to any serial killer cases. I know there have been various kooky theories proposed that don't hold up, but given the horrific condition of Elizabeth Short's body and the theatricality of the crime scene, I'm wondering if there was ever any serious professional investigation over that angle. Yeah. Yes, there was. As a matter of fact, the original investigators, they looked at the Cleveland torso killings. They looked at that. How do I know that? Because one of the retired LAPD captains who had worked homicide in the 40s was the executor of Jack Donahoe's estate. Who's Jack Donahoe? Jack Donahoe was head of homicide in the 1940s. He was head of homicide during the Black Dahlia case. And as executor of the estate, this retired captain had all of Jack Donahoe's stuff. And he had tons of clippings about, there used to be a thing called a clipping service. And what a clipping service was is you would tell somebody who would cut articles out of the newspaper and send them to you. That was a clipping service. And so that was kind of common. So Jack Donahoe had this huge clip file on the Cleveland torso killing. So yeah, they knew about that in the 40s. They eliminated that. I will say this, that one thing I have learned in doing the Black Dahlia cases, serial killings, or killings, I should say, unsolved killings exert an incredibly powerful magnetism for one another. And it has to do with how we process information, how human beings process information. We take things and we put things into patterns because that's how we store our information. That's how we process it. And so it is entirely possible for people to take this murder and this murder. Well, they're both unsolved. Let's put them together. And really, there is nothing at all like the Black Dahlia case. Nothing. I have looked. You will not find anything in terms of, people will say, well, what about Cleveland torso? Well, they looked at that, and it's totally different. Gene French. Again, Gene French is totally different. So, and I could get into all these other cases, and it's like, nah, they're not related. It's just no. It was one of a kind. Um, and Steve Hodel, wherever he is heavily invested in all these killings being related because he wants his dad to be a jet set serial killer. In reality, all those killings are different. They have almost nothing in common. So that's kind of that's my response to that. Okay, Ed Edwards. Okay, Carol, what do I think of Ed Edwards? Okay, I I did an interview. I did a sit down interview with this guy. Who, first of all, if you're asking who is Ed Edwards, there was a there was a guy. He was a retired homicide detective or retired. He called himself, I think, Cold Case Carlson or Cold Case Carlton, something like that. And I did an interview on camera with this guy and one of his producers, and he had the notion that um, he was doing these Google searches and everything led back to this really crackpot Black Dahlia website, and I won't even give the address of it because it is just so loony. Anyway, if you look at the story of Edward Wayne Edwards, you will see that in order for him he would be the child prodigy of serial killers. He supposedly killed Elizabeth Short when he was in his early teens, but that wasn't his first killing. He had already killed somebody else, and it's like, no. I think I think Edward Wayne Edwards had to have been like 13 or 14 when he killed Elizabeth Short, and it's like, no. And he was, from Chicago. It's like, okay, and I said, how did he get to Los Angeles? Well, he stole a car. And this is, it's like, no, none of this is true. So, the detective who was behind the Edward Wayne Edwards, he's a nice guy. I had coffee with him. He's fine. But what he says is just impossible. Okay. Just not at all possible. Okay. Mansour, I hope I'm saying that right. Let's see here. The problem is that George Hodel comes off as some arrogant, power-depraved guy that's capable of a lust murder, even if there's no evidence really tying him to Elizabeth Short's murder. Didn't cadaver dogs even find evidence of human remains at the old Hodel house? Yeah. Okay. That's I will need a running start at that one as well. As part of the Steve Hodel's George Hodel franchise, serial killer franchise, he did I forget the name of the TV show, but a TV show wanted to go to the Soudan house, the Franklin house, and I don't know if they were doing paranormal stuff. I think they were, but anyway, they had this cadaver dog named Buster, and owned by a guy named Paul Dostie. And Buster, the cadaver dog, supposedly alerted on human remains and all that kind of thing. Well, okay. The original TV show didn't even include that. They cut it out. And so Steve, somebody got that footage and used it later on. Yeah, Buster kind of sort of alerted on something. But there's the whole, let me put it this way. Steve Hodel has this sort of, he has this affinity with people who are sort of shady and on the edge, kind of conspiracy theorists. And the guy, again, Paul Dostie, I've never met him, nice guy, but it's like, okay, well, I'll do my cadaver dog here, cadaver. If you know anything about police dogs, like drug detection dogs or bomb detection dogs, you have to work with them constantly. They have to be kept sharp because they're a dog. Okay. It isn't like they can sit around, in front of the fireplace and then suddenly, well, we're going to go look for human remains. You have to work with them constantly. And I'm not sure just how rigorous Buster was to begin with. So they found something and they sent it off to another guy. This, again, sort of sketchy analysis. And I think the guy, and I forget his name, but he's involved with, he gets involved with like the Manson family stuff. And there's this whole circle of these people all know each other. And I think it was about a year had gone by after they sent the so-called human remains back to this guy. And there, Steve Hodel and Paul Dostie did a radio show. Well, and Dostie says, I don't think we're ever going to get the remains back. I don't think we're ever going to get the results. Well, finally they did get the results, and it was literally years went by. And the guy said, well, yeah, there's human remains from, could be the last 100 years. And it's like, not a smoking gun at all. So yeah, there was Buster the Cadaver dog, but, and the thing about Buster the Cadaver dog is it's the cute pet story meets Jack the Ripper. So it had a lot of like supermarket media appeal, but in reality, no, there's just nothing to that. And I could go on and on about Steve Hodel's claims about the house, but I'd rather take another question. Okay, let's see. Where am I here? Buster the Cadaver dog. Yeah, if the Golden State Killer wasn't found, Steve would have blamed his father. Yes, that's true. Let's see. Helen asks, what role did Dr. Partica play? Okay, who's Dr. Partica? Okay, Walter Bailey, the fellow I mentioned earlier who lived a block from the Black Dahlia crime scene and really was a surgeon. And that's the thing, of all the people who have been put forward, Walter Bailey is the one individual who actually could have done that. And as much as Steve Hodel rants and raves about how his dad was to a surgeon, like, no, he wasn't. He wasn't a surgeon. That is just more. That's one of Steve Hodel's many, many lies. And the reality is, you can't. Pretty much every word out of Steve Hodel's mouth is a lie. His dad was never a surgeon. His dad took the basic amount of surgery you needed to graduate from medical school. Steve will tell you that cutting somebody in half was a procedure taught in medical school in the 30s. No, not even close. It's just, anyway, that's Walter Bailey. So who is Dr. Partica? Well, Dr. Partica was a World War II refugee and was trained in Vienna and ended up in Los Angeles. She worked as a nurse for a while until she could get her license and practice medicine. And so she and Walter Bailey were in practice together. He took her on. And a relationship developed between Dr. Partica and Dr. Bailey. And he left his wife and we don't know where Walter Bailey was living. We don't know, because he used his office address for everything. So we don't know. But Dr. Partica was the partner. What her role was is really unclear. Bailey was the distinguished surgeon, and I think Partica had also been trained in surgery, but she was a partner. Walter Bailey was the main event, and but that's who they were. After Walter Bailey died, there was the widow, the wife, and Dr. Partica, the partner, got into a legal fight over the contents of Walter Bailey's office, his estate. And so there's a lot of records in the probate files as to allegations back and forth between the widow, Mrs. Bailey, and Partica. And so for us, that's great, because it documents everything that was in his office and all that other stuff. And that's kind of who Dr. Partica was. After Walter Bailey died, she eventually left town. And that was her story. Okay, let's see here. let me go on. Let's see. Hey, Jeffrey, good morning from Australia. Okay, let's see here. Mia, do you think there's any possibility that LA law enforcement could or would run a forensic genetic genealogy test on any of Elizabeth's items that were sent in by the killer all those decades ago? That's a question I get somewhat often. And as I was describing earlier, what do we have? Because when you listen to, oh, the evidence is all missing. Well, there wasn't a heck of a lot of evidence, really. They never found her clothes. They think they found her purse. They think they found her shoes. Um, all of the items from her purse that were mailed to the examiner and other papers, they were all dampened with some kind of solvent. And the news accounts described that you could smell whether it was gasoline or kerosene or some kind of solvent. It's not clear exactly what the guy used, but something. And so what was in the envelope was snapshots, her birth certificate, some business cards, the address book, miscellaneous, just little. And if you go out on the internet, you can see pictures of just this little pile of paper of stuff that was from the purse. Anyway, I'm not sure what you could actually get in terms of DNA off this stuff, since the killer wiped everything down. First of all, wiped everything down with solvent, and then you don't know who's handled it over the years. As for the envelope, I'm not sure. They took that to the crime lab, and I think portions of the envelope, at least, because it was all addressed with cutout newspaper letters. And I think some of that material was sent to the FBI for testing. For one of the things the FBI did was it identified her fingerprints, and they ran some chemical tests, because the LAPD crime lab was not as advanced as the FBI lab. And so the question is, how much survives that you could even do DNA testing on? I think it would be much more interesting to do DNA testing on Geneva Elroy's, like her dress, because they still have that. And that would be interesting. So let's see. Okay. Steve built a Hollywood story. Yeah. Okay. Linda asks, did Elizabeth Short have a blood drain tube in her leg where they may have drained the blood? Maybe a dumb question. No. She was exsanguinated, bled out. And but I don't think it was, I don't think it was done that way. I think part of the cutting in half, I think that was the process used to drain the body of blood, because when they found her, there was very, very little blood. I think one of the original detectives said there was a drop or two, and it was pretty watery. She had been drained, and the body had been washed. The killer did not give her a makeover. Didn't give her a rinse and set. That's not true. But did wash the body and bleed it out. Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. Paulina, I hope I'm pronouncing it. I've been following your work for a while now on the Black Dahlia case, and I can't wait for your book to come out. Thank you. My question below is regarding this snippet from a David Lynch book regarding his meeting with John St. John. I remember reading this a while back, and I realized everything that comes from Steve Hodel is BS, and how he connects this to George Hodel. But what do you make of this Lynch story? Could this photograph really exist? Okay. What Paulina is talking about is, I think it's David Lynch says, oh yeah, I met with John St. John, and he had this briefcase, and he showed me this photograph, and it was the Black Dahlia crime scene, but it was taken at night, and yada, yada, yada. Utter bull. No. If you know anything about photography, if you know anything about film photography, black and white photography, that would have been by existing light in the dark. Impossible. Without a flash, there is absolutely no way you could get a photograph like that. And there are interviews with John St. John. one of the interesting interviews. There's a fun documentary about Los Angeles called Shotgun Freeway, and they interviewed John St. John, and he was like all the homicide detectives, very careful about what he said, and the idea that he would show David Lynch a photograph that nobody had ever seen is like, nah, that's David Lynch bullshit. Not true. Um, so no, is that story true? No. And I think Steve Hodel went so far as to say, oh yeah, my dad took that picture because of course his dad did everything, uh, and was a photographer and all that. No. Um, I would say that is absolutely impossible. Knowing what I do about photography of that era, it's like there is no way. Film is so slow without a flash taking it at night. Nah, didn't happen. Um, so no. Let's see. Uh, let's see. Don't be fatuous, Jeffrey. Oh, Linda, am I surprised that people are interested in the Elizabeth Short? No. No, it's a great. It is an interesting story, and I think the fact that it's unsolved um, kind of lends it to that. Um, the interest in Elizabeth Short never totally went away, but it goes in waves. It goes in waves, and it's good, and it's also very strange in that you do have people cosplay as the Black Dahlia, and they post selfies on Instagram of the slashed cheeks and the flower in their hair, and it's like, you know, that's really not, that's really not cool. Um, and the selfies at Elizabeth Short's grave, just don't do that. Don't do that. That's not cool. Okay, let's see. Don't be fatuous. Is Steve Hodel actually sitting on useful, reliable documents which could be of value in this case? No, absolutely not. Um, Steve, the problem, Jeffrey, is that Steve Hodel can't even, my buddy Boxy here, Steve Hodel can't even interpret what he's got correctly. Okay. He cherry picks little bitty document. He cherry picks, like there's the transcripts of the bugging of his dad, and he cherry picks that stuff just mercilessly. You have no idea what a fraud he is. He will go through and say, um, he will go through and say, well, the transcripts say this. And my favorite example is, okay, um, one of the technicians bugging the house says, I'm having trouble with the equipment. And Steve will turn around and say, I'm in trouble. It's like, no, he's just a total fraud. So no, Jeffrey, in terms of him sitting on anything useful, no. He can't interpret what he has. It's just a huge joke. Okay. I'm gonna go over I'll go over a few more minutes here. Let me do one more email question here. Oh, okay. Robert asks, what is with that Hodel photo purporting to show cigarette burns on the back of Elizabeth Short? I know she had moles on her back, but burn marks don't look like moles. Any idea? Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Elizabeth Short and the cigarette burns. Okay. There aren't any. No, there aren't any. When you go through the inquest, it doesn't mention cigarette burns. No. What happened? And um, facts have a way of like attaching themselves to the Black Dahlia case. And what happened was there was a teenage girl who ran away, ditched school, and all that stuff, and she claimed that she had been kidnapped because if you run away from home or ditch school, you're going to say that you were kidnapped. And oh, he threatened me. I'm going to do to you what I did to the Black Dahlia. And she burned herself with cigarettes. And so that's kind of the origin of the cigarette burn story. But in reality, no, did not happen, does not exist. It's just one of those things that's sort of amorphously glommed on to the Black Dahlia case. Okay, let's see. I'm going to take one more. Let's see, one more live question and one live one and one more email one. Let's see. November Bat. Do not buy that ESVJ day footage says it is. Your take on it. Okay. What am I talking about? There is random stock footage of a VJ celebration on Hollywood Boulevard. VJ Day was the day they celebrated the victory over Japan during World War II. And there is random stock footage of people on Hollywood Boulevard. And originally, there was, I think it was Channel 4. I'm not quite positive on that, but the original show was on Channel 4, and they found this stock footage, and they hedged it. They said, well, we're not sure, but we think that's Elizabeth Short. Now, they didn't bother to do any research, of course. And I think Steve Hodel has come down on the idea that it's Elizabeth Short, but it is not. It is just some random, it is stock footage of some random woman. How can we be so sure? How can Larry Harnish say so definitively it's not her? Okay, well, Charlie Gordon, Matt Gordon, got killed on the last days of the war in August 1945. Okay, the telegram advising Elizabeth Short that her fiance had died and they were engaged was sent to her from Matt Gordon's mom to Elizabeth Short in Medford. Okay, so we know without question Elizabeth Short was in Medford on VJ Day. She wasn't in California. She wasn't in Hollywood. She wasn't on Hollywood Boulevard. People have just sort of randomly decided there should be movie footage of her, but no, we know where she was. She was in Medford. That's impossible. End of story. But people just won't let go of it. Okay, let me take one more email question, and let's see. Do you personally know of any evidence in the Black Dahlia case not previously made public? Will you in the book? I think it's all pretty much out there. I mean, in terms of the newspaper coverage of the Black Dahlia case, the reporters in those days had tremendous access. The relationship between newspapers and the police was totally different than it is today. Right now, anyway, it's almost, I guess, unimaginable how close the law enforcement and newspaper reporters were in those days. And so the newspaper reporters got pretty much everything. There are a couple of key questions. Somebody emailed me, how many key questions are there? There are 3. And so most of the stuff got out. I mean, most of the stuff was in the paper. And if you go back and read all the news accounts very carefully, you'll pretty much know what the police have. There was not a lot that the police didn't hold back a lot from the reporters. The reporters were there. And in fact, when you go through the FBI memos, you'll see that the reporters were actually interfering with the investigation. There were reporters staked out in the homicide bureau, listening to conversations and stuff like that. So the newspapers pretty much had everything. So there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of surprises as far as I know. And let's see. I said I would. Okay, I think that is where we are. I did not get even close. Oh, I have one question here. Suzanne asked a question, and I promised I would answer this. Speaking about Paul DeRiver. Okay, who is Paul DeRiver? Paul DeRiver was the Leslie Dillon guy. And the question is it DeRiver or DeRiver? It's like, no, it's DeRiver. And long story short about his name, he graduated from Tulane University. He was an ear, nose, and throat guy with the VA. And he sort of styled himself into this, into a psychiatrist. And he was originally, I believe his name was Joseph Paul Israel. That's how he graduated from Tulane University. But he came up with the name DeRiver. And so that is how you pronounce his name. It's DeRiver, as in deriving. I could say a lot more about Paul DeRiver. He was the architect of the Leslie Dillon debacle. But we're at 11:07, so I think that'll do it for now. Before we go, I want to say thank you. Thank you to everybody who showed up. I will do another one of these the first Tuesday in July, which is, let me get my calendar here. Okay. First Tuesday in July, which is, oh my goodness, it's the 4th of July. Well, 4th of July is the first Tuesday in July, which will be the 4th of July at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will do it. And until then, thanks a lot. Great to have everybody, and I will see you in a month. And in the meantime, keep your eye out for Steve Hodel. Where is he? Where did he go? Where's the great detective? Maybe we'll find out. Okay. So long, everybody. Boxy, say goodbye. Okay. Next time.